If a man ignores you, the first thing that usually crosses your mind is to ask yourself what you did wrong, whether you said something inappropriate, or if his interest suddenly changed. But what if I told you that his indifference has more to do with his own insecurities than with any mistake you think you made? Louise Hay claimed that what we project onto others is often a reflection of our own fears and inner wounds. So if a man chooses to distance himself and avoid you, what is he really expressing with his silence? Is it coldness, disinterest, or simply a mask to hide what he doesn't want to face or admit, neither to you nor to himself? The truth is that, just like women, the male mind is also full of shadows, hidden corners where his greatest fears reside. Louise Hay called this the shadow, that aspect of our personality that we try to deny or repress. When a man ignores you, it's not always about disinterest. Often, without realizing it, he is reflecting his own insecurities, his fear of attachment, or even a feeling of inferiority that he prefers to avoid at all costs. His apparent indifference can actually be the clearest sign of an internal battle that even he doesn't know how to handle. Now, why do some men act this way? Is it a matter of pride, emotional coldness, or simply a deep fear of showing vulnerability? It's easy to think that his silence is a sign of strength, but the truth may be quite the opposite. Louise Hay said that until we make conscious what is in our unconscious, it will continue to direct our lives, and we will call that destiny. So, does this man who ignores you really have control, or is he a prisoner of his own internal conflicts? Here is where many women make the most common mistake. They see his indifference as a challenge to overcome. They try to catch his attention, prove their worth, or decipher the enigma of his behavior. But according to Louise Hay, true power is not in chasing what seems unattainable, but in learning from every experience and strengthening our own essence. Instead of obsessing over what his silence means, what if you started asking yourself what he is trying to teach you about yourself? Think about it. What if his greatest weakness is not his apparent detachment, but his inability to handle what he truly feels for you? In this video, we will explore what it really means when a man ignores you and how this attitude, far from being a sign of superiority, can become the key to reclaiming your power. He distances himself because he is certain that no matter what happens, you will always be there. He believes he can come and go as he pleases, confident that your interest in him will not change. But what happens when that certainty disappears? What happens when suddenly you are no longer the predictable woman he took for granted? Louise Hay said that the greatest illusion of the human being is believing they can control what they do not understand. And this applies perfectly to relationships. A man only feels the absence of someone when he realizes that the stability he had has been replaced by uncertainty. His skill is not in distancing himself, but in his conviction that you will never leave. But when you decide to stop reacting, stop waiting, and stop showing unwavering interest, everything changes. You stop being a passive piece in his story and become an enigma, a mystery he can no longer easily solve. And it is at this point that his mind enters into conflict, because as Louise Hay said, what a human fears most is what they cannot predict. Not knowing for sure what will happen with you generates a doubt that corrodes him more than the loss itself. Many women fall into the trap of trying to regain the attention of a man who ignores them. They post indirect messages, check if he has seen their messages, and look for excuses to appear on his radar. But paradoxically, all this only reinforces his feeling of control. What really changes the game is understanding that your absence has more impact than any desperate attempt to be noticed. When he starts to notice that you no longer write to him, that you don't react to his posts, that you no longer make an effort to get his attention, a void opens in his mind. The woman he thought he knew is no longer there. And this is the first great weakness of a man who ignores a woman. He only feels in control as long as he thinks she is still available. When that belief breaks, he enters a state of uncertainty that can lead him to question things he never imagined. What if he lost something valuable? What if you are no longer part of his world as before? Louise Hay said that everything we reject in others is a reflection of what we reject in ourselves. That's why many times a man distances himself, not because he doesn't care about you, but because he doesn't want to face the impact you have on him. But what if one day he realizes what he has lost? Now let's go further. Would you like to know the 5 most sensitive points of a man who distances himself and ignores you? Those triggers that, when touched, can make even the proudest reconsider their attitudes? Then stay with me, because what comes next may completely change your way of seeing this game. When you decide to disappear from his life, when you stop reacting to his indifference, something unexpected happens. He begins to feel a discomfort that didn't exist before. Suddenly, the presence he took for granted is no longer there, and without realizing it, he receives a small dose of his own medicine. The silence that once served him to feel in control now turns against him. Louise Hay said that the human psyche always seeks balance, and that when one extreme disappears, the other intensifies. If before he felt secure by ignoring you, now the void of your absence begins to weigh on him. And this is where the signs begin. Suddenly, you notice he looked at your stories, reacted to a post, left a subtle comment as if to remind you he's still there. But the difference is that now, he no longer has the certainty that you will also be there. That attention he received effortlessly becomes his greatest weakness. Louise Hay teaches us that the human mind hates uncertainty, and when something constant disappears, the brain enters a state of alert. This is the second great weak point of a man who ignores: the security of believing you will always be there. When that security breaks, his inner world begins to shake. And this is just the beginning. Do you want to discover what other sensitive points can make a man who ignores you react in a way he himself never expected? Then keep watching, because what comes next could completely change the way you understand his behavior and how you position yourself in this story. One of the reasons a man feels comfortable ignoring you is because, in his mind, he believes he has absolute control of the situation. If he perceives that you depend emotionally on his attention, that you fear losing him, or that you think you will never find someone better, then his confidence is reinforced and his indifference becomes a strategy of power. But what happens when that dynamic changes? When a woman stops projecting an energy of lack and instead begins to radiate confidence and abundance, something in that man's mind becomes unbalanced. Louise claimed that what we resist persists, and in relationships, the same happens. The more you chase someone, the further they go away. But when you take distance and place yourself at the center of your own life, the situation transforms completely. Because when he feels that the influence he had over you begins to fade, when he notices that his absence no longer affects you the same way, something changes inside him. Uncertainty appears. And this is the key point. The game truly reverses when you strengthen your self-esteem, when you stop settling for crumbs of attention, and above all, when you understand that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. The woman who knows herself, who knows her worth, does not chase, does not beg, and does not exhaust herself trying to be seen. She simply becomes irresistible because she projects a magnetic energy that does not depend on external validation. And when you reach this level of personal confidence, you not only regain your power, but also weaken his. Because suddenly, he no longer has the certainty that he can ignore you and come back whenever he wants without consequences. Now he is the one who begins to question, what if she is no longer there when I decide to return? Before moving on to the next weak point of a man who ignores you, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt that a man ignored you because he knew he could do it without it changing anything? If this content is helping you, give it a like right now and tell me in the comments where you are watching this video from. And don't go away yet, because at the end of this video, I will explain exactly how to make a man who distances himself learn to value you, and even more, to fear losing you. So stay with me, because now we're going to discover another weak point that can completely change this game when a man distances himself and ignores you. He does it with the arrogance of someone who believes he is the center of your universe. He feels unique, special, indispensable to your happiness. And do you know why? Because many women, without even realizing it, feed that illusion. They isolate themselves in the relationship, and invest all their energy in him and in the process. Forget that there are other areas of their life that also deserve attention. Louise Hay used to say that what we focus our energy on grows. So if all your attention is directed toward a man who ignores you, all you're doing is reinforcing the sense of control he believes he has over you. But what if, all of a sudden, he realized that he is no longer the only focus of your attention? The third weak point of a man who ignores you is precisely the illusion of exclusivity that he thinks he has. And to break this cycle, you need to weaken that sense of superiority that keeps him in his comfort zone. The best way to do that is to reconnect with yourself and with the people who truly add value to your life. Your friends, your family, the activities you are passionate about. Maybe, without realizing it, you distanced yourself from those connections because you were too focused on him. But when you decide to prioritize them again, something powerful happens. Your world expands, your energy shifts, and you begin to see that he is not, nor ever was, the only pillar of your happiness. And here's something important. It's not about finding another man to replace him. You don't need to fill a void with someone else. The key lies in rediscovering yourself, in opening up to new experiences, in surrounding yourself with people who make you feel valuable and whole. And what happens to him in this process? That sense of being irreplaceable starts to fall apart. Louise Hay used to say that human beings fear losing control over what they believe they possess. And when a man realizes that you are no longer the same woman who patiently waited for him, he begins to feel exactly what he used to make you feel: uncertainty. For him, this is a hard blow to absorb. But there's more. Because when we reach this point, the rules of the game change completely. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal how to use this to your advantage, so that instead of being the one who waits, it's him who begins to doubt and question whether he can continue ignoring you without consequences. So stay with me, because what comes next may make you see this whole situation with new eyes. One of the greatest weak points of a man who ignores you is his, often unconscious, need to feel essential to you. There are men who convince themselves that a woman needs them, whether emotionally, financially, or even just to feel secure in her life. And that belief gives them a false sense of control. But what happens when you show him that your life does not depend on his presence, that you don't need him, but instead, you consciously choose who you allow by your side? At that moment, the dynamic changes. You are no longer the needy woman, the one he could ignore without consequence. Now you are an independent woman who doesn't require anyone to feel complete and who only allows people into her life who truly add value. And this is something that can destabilize him, because it means that if he wants to remain part of your world, he'll have to prove that he has something valuable to offer. It is no longer enough for him to just show up occasionally or give intermittent signs of interest. Now the burden is on him. And this is where the game changes completely. He can continue ignoring you if he wants. But what used to work in his favor now begins to turn against him. Because while you evolve, grow, and become stronger and more secure, he realizes something he never considered before. He no longer has the same power over you. And then, a truth emerges that he can no longer ignore. It's not you who is losing, it's him. Before I move on to the final piece of advice, the one that will show you exactly how to make a man who pulls away not only learn to value you, but even fear losing you, I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed this pattern in a relationship? If this video is helping you see things more clearly, give it a like right now and tell me in the comments, because what's coming next could completely transform how you approach this situation. So stay with me, because now we're going to discover the final piece of this puzzle. A man's self-esteem is one of his most sensitive points, and at the same time, one of his greatest weaknesses. When he decides to pull away and ignore you, he's operating from a position of apparent confidence. But this is where an idea that Louise Hay strongly supported comes into play. A person's identity is built from the projections and reflections they receive from others. What does this mean? That when a man feels admired, desired, and valued by a woman, he receives a dose of self-esteem that strengthens his ego. It's like an invisible fuel that gives him a sense of control over the situation. But what happens when that source of validation is cut off? When suddenly he no longer feels that unconditional admiration from you? When, without warning, the attention he used to receive from you disappears? Something inside him begins to weaken. Because the great truth is that most men don't realize the impact of a woman's presence until she emotionally distances herself. It's not necessary to ignore him physically or to play unnecessary games. The real change happens when you stop treating him as someone special, when you stop glorifying his presence in your life, when suddenly he is no longer the center of your attention. And this affects his psyche in a way he can't even explain in words. Louise Hay used to say that the human unconscious acts symbolically. And when a man perceives that the woman who used to elevate him no longer looks at him the same way, no longer gives him the same importance, something inside him becomes destabilized. He doesn't fully understand it, but he feels it. And here lies the key. This is one of the most powerful weak points of a man. He gets used to being desired and admired without having to do anything to deserve it. But the moment that validation disappears, what was once just a source of comfort becomes a lack, a void he doesn't know how to fill. And it is precisely at that moment where you must be one step ahead. Instead of begging for attention or trying to prove your worth, you simply withdraw that energy from him and redirect it toward yourself. You become the woman who doesn't need his approval to feel complete. And right there, in that precise moment, is when he begins to see what he is really losing. But there's more. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how to completely transform this dynamic and make it so that, instead of you questioning your worth, it's he who begins to wonder whether he can keep ignoring you without consequence. Because what's coming next is the final key that will ensure that, instead of you waiting for him, it's he who begins to feel the need to win you back. So stay with me, because this last part could mark a turning point in how you view this situation, and more importantly, in how he begins to see you. When a woman becomes fully aware of her own worth and understands that her well-being does not depend on the presence or approval of a man, a fundamental shift occurs in the relationship dynamic. The one who once felt safe ignoring her, confident that she would always be there regardless of how he treated her, begins to experience a feeling he had never considered before: uncertainty. Because when he senses that the attention and affection he used to receive unconditionally are no longer available without effort, his confidence begins to crack, forcing him to rethink many things he had previously taken for granted. One of the most decisive factors in creating that impact in a man's mind has nothing to do with manipulation tactics or superficial strategies of artificial indifference, but with the application of a much more powerful principle: the principle of reciprocity. Louise Hay used to say that relationships are mirrors that reflect back what we give. However, if that reflection is imbalanced, where only one person gives admiration, desire, and attention, while the other simply receives without feeling the need to reciprocate, the scale tips in favor of the one who puts in the least effort. This is precisely what happens when a woman gives everything without ensuring she receives the same in return. The moment a man becomes accustomed to receiving without having to earn it, the attention and affection she gives him begin to lose value in his eyes. He starts to see her presence as something guaranteed, as if it were a given right instead of a privilege that requires care and reciprocity. This is the reason why so many women end up feeling exhausted and frustrated in their relationships. They give themselves completely, hoping that at some point that man will open his eyes and realize everything he has received, returning that love with the same intensity. However, the truth is that recognition doesn't come by waiting passively. It comes when an internal shift changes the power dynamic within the relationship. This is the shift you need to make right now. A woman who truly understands her worth never gives everything away for free, nor without ensuring there is balance. She knows that for a relationship to be healthy and meaningful, there must be reciprocity, and that her self-love is the foundation of any solid connection. When a woman adopts this mindset, the entire dynamic changes. The man who used to ignore her and felt free to walk away whenever he pleased, without fear of losing her, now faces a completely different reality. Suddenly, he can no longer assume that she'll still be there, ready to accept any crumbs of his attention. And it is at this point that his sense of security begins to crumble. He starts to wonder if he's truly the one in control of the situation. If you've ever felt like you've given more in a relationship than you received, tell me in the comments. And if this content is helping you see things more clearly, like it now, because what comes next might help you view this situation from a completely different perspective. True change happens when you understand that the way a man treats you is a direct reflection of how he perceives his value in your life. If he feels he can walk away, ignore you, and come back whenever he pleases, without facing consequences, he'll never feel the need to put in effort, nor will he fear losing you. Louise Hay explained that human beings, unconsciously, tend to test others' boundaries to see how far they can go without facing repercussions. And this happens more often in relationships than you'd imagine. Many men, often without even realizing it, adopt behavioral patterns where they choose to pull away, show indifference, and play with a woman's emotional uncertainty, knowing that no matter what they do, she'll still be available to them. But what would happen if that certainty suddenly disappeared? When a woman decides to stop offering free validation and breaks the predictability of her behavior, the impact on that man's psyche is far deeper than he can comprehend. He had grown used to the idea that his mere presence was enough to receive attention and admiration without any effort. But the moment that attention is no longer guaranteed, he begins to experience a feeling he hadn't previously associated with her: insecurity. Louise Hay said that the human mind is designed to seek patterns and stability, as this gives us a sense of control over our reality. But when someone who is always available suddenly changes their behavior, the brain goes into a state of alert. And it's in this exact moment that the game changes direction. The man who used to ignore her now feels he no longer has full control. He's forced to reconsider whether he can continue acting the same way without facing consequences. Because for the first time in a long time, he's the one who starts to feel he might lose something valuable. This is where the difference lies between a woman who is valued and one who is ignored. The former knows her attention is a privilege, not an obligation. She doesn't chase, she doesn't beg, and above all, she doesn't accept less than she deserves. And when a man perceives a real possibility of losing her, his desire for control transforms into a need to be accepted once again. But the most important thing here is that, at that point, the woman who used to wait is no longer waiting for anything. She has become a woman who no longer needs to be chosen, because she has realized that she always had the power to choose who she allows into her life. That is the mindset shift that finally makes a man understand the true value of a woman. And this is only the beginning of something much deeper. One of the biggest mistakes a woman can make in a relationship is clinging to the hope that someday a man will open his eyes and finally recognize her true worth. However, what many don't realize is that no one can see in them what they themselves have not learned to recognize first. Louise Hay affirmed that everything we accept in others is a reflection of what we've accepted within ourselves. If you constantly settle for less than what you truly deserve and continue investing time, energy, and love in someone who doesn't show the same level of commitment, the message you're sending to your own mind is that maybe you're not valuable enough to receive something better. This belief, even if unconscious, ends up shaping how you allow others to treat you. When you cling to a relationship where there's no reciprocity and justify the indifference with hope that one day that person will change, what you're really doing is anchoring your self-worth to external validation. But the truth is, the only person who can change this situation is you. Now imagine for a moment what happens when you stop living based on that expectation and begin to see yourself from a place of complete emotional self-sufficiency and inner security. Think of the impact it could have on a man's mind when, overnight, he realizes that the woman who once idealized him and waited anxiously for his attention now seems completely free of his influence. In that moment, the security he had vanishes, and for the first time, he begins to wonder if he's made a mistake by taking your presence for granted. When a man feels he has lost control of the situation, a new emotion appears: fear. It's not just the fear of losing you as a person, but the unsettling realization that he is no longer a fundamental part of your life, that he has become irrelevant, that his absence no longer produces in you the effect he expected. That loss of influence can be devastating to his ego, because until then, he was sure that no matter what he did, you'd always be there for him. This is where the power dynamic shifts completely. The question is no longer about whether he'll come back or not, but whether you even want someone who only values you when he's faced with the possibility of losing you. Before we go deeper, I want you to pause and reflect. Have you ever been in a similar situation? Have you noticed that you gave too much in a relationship without receiving the same in return? It's important to understand that this is not about bad luck or always meeting the wrong person. It's about how you've allowed this dynamic to repeat itself. Louise Hay said that what we don't face within ourselves, we inevitably project outward. If you find yourself trapped in a pattern where you constantly attract people who don't value you or make you feel invisible, maybe it's time to ask why you continue to invest more in others than you invest in yourself. If you spend more time worrying about what he feels, what he wants, or what he thinks, without stopping to ask yourself what you truly need, then you've probably been placing your self-worth in someone else's hands. And this, more than anything else, is what truly needs to change. The biggest mistake a woman can make is believing she needs to prove her worth to someone who, if he really wanted her in his life, would see it without tests or constant sacrifices. If a man believes he can ignore you without consequence, he will never feel the need to make an effort for you. And if he's also convinced he can leave and come back whenever he pleases, without doing anything to deserve your attention, he will never be afraid of losing you. You are the one teaching him how to treat you. You are the one setting the boundaries for what is acceptable and what isn't. If you haven't been valued the way you truly deserve, maybe it's time to make a deep change in the way you see yourself and in what you choose to allow into your life. Because in the end, this situation was never about him. It's about you, about the image you hold of your own worth, and how you position yourself in your relationships. Louise Hay used to say that everything we attract into our lives is a reflection of what we carry inside. If you constantly encounter people who don't prioritize you, who ignore you, or who seem unable to see everything you have to offer, then instead of asking what's wrong with them, start asking yourself, when did you begin to believe that you had to fight for someone's attention just to be seen? A woman who truly knows her own worth never wears herself out trying to be recognized. She doesn't need to prove anything, because her very presence is enough to attract those who genuinely deserve to be in her life. And this is where everything starts to make sense. The man who ignores you today may appear confident on the outside, but deep down, he's afraid. Afraid of losing the control he thought he had over you. Afraid of no longer being the center of your world. And most of all, afraid of realizing that he may have wasted the attention of an incredible woman who has now simply decided to move on. If you take everything you've learned here and apply it to your life, if you work on strengthening your self-esteem, learn to be emotionally independent, and promise yourself that you'll never again accept less than what you truly deserve, he will feel that shift in a way he won't be able to ignore. And at that moment, he will have only two options. Either he learns to truly and sincerely value you, or he finally understands that he never had as much power over you as he thought. But before you even ask yourself whether he'll react or not, there's a more important question you should be asking. Do you really want to be with someone who only realizes your worth when he feels he might lose you? Wouldn't it be much better to be with someone who chooses you from the start, without games, without tests, without conditions, simply because he knows you're extraordinary and never doubts it? The truth is, a woman who knows she has options never despairs over a man who walks away. She doesn't try to convince anyone to choose her, because she understands her worth doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. In her world, love isn't something you beg for or negotiate. It's something that flows naturally. If you have to try too hard to be seen by someone, maybe it's time to stop trying to get their attention and start seeing yourself with the eyes you always wished others would see you with. The real lesson behind everything you've learned today isn't just about how to make a man feel your absence. It goes much deeper than that. It's about becoming a woman who will never again beg for attention. A woman who will never again feel the need to wait for a message, a sign, or any form of external validation to feel complete. It's time to leave behind the mindset of someone who settles for scraps of affection and start living with the absolute certainty that self-love is the foundation for everything truly worthwhile. Because the moment you decide to change how you see yourself, the entire world begins to respond to that renewed energy. And the most ironic part of all this is that the very same man who once thought he could ignore you without consequences suddenly finds himself trapped in a completely unexpected situation. The desperate need to recover what he lost without even realizing it. But this is where you must ask yourself the most important question of all. Do you really want to stay in the same place, waiting for a man to finally realize your worth one day? Or would you rather take a step forward and become the kind of woman who never again has to worry about that, because she already knows with absolute certainty who she is and what she deserves? That answer is yours and yours alone to give. Because at the end of the day, what truly makes you powerful is not the reaction you generate in others, it's how you see yourself. And when you truly internalize this truth, when you feel in the depths of your being that you should never have settled for less than what you're worth, that's when the real change happens. From that moment on, you will no longer accept half-hearted relationships, endless waiting, or empty promises, simply because you will no longer be available for anything that doesn't match the level of your own self-love. If this video has opened your mind and helped you see things from a completely different perspective, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this isn't just a video for reflection. It's the beginning of a journey of deep transformation. You deserve far more than just a fleeting moment of clarity. You deserve support, information, and tools to help you build the life you truly desire, and we're here to walk that path with you. And of course, if this content has been helpful, give it a like right now. It not only helps me continue creating material that truly makes a difference, but also allows other women who need to hear this message to know they are not alone. If you've ever been through a situation like this, if you've ever felt like you were giving too much without receiving the same in return, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Let's talk about it, because simply putting into words what you've lived through can be the first step toward changing it. And finally, I want to remind you of something you may have forgotten. The power has always been in your hands. You just needed to realize it. So now, stop waiting, stop doubting, and stop asking for something that should have been yours by right all along. Lift your head high, walk with confidence, and live the life you truly deserve. No excuses, no fears, and no looking back.